Welcome, welcome, Book Mecca family. This is Shaylin Scott, founder of Book Mecca, the online Black bookstore and literary resource for all things Black lit. It is a pleasure to have you all here with us viewing. As you know, once a month we try and bring an awesome author on to find out not only about the work that they're writing, but also about them as a person and all the great things that they're able to accomplish. And so without further ado, I want to introduce our big star today. And I know y'all saw it, it's Brit Bennett. Okay. Welcome, welcome, Brit.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you are more than welcome. It is definitely a pleasure to have you. And I don't know if all of our viewers there have read her book, or either one of them, Mothers or The Vanishing Half. If you have not gotten her book, definitely check it out. And I'll even show you what it looks like. This is her book here. Get the book. It is on everyone's book club list, best read list, the most talked about book in 2020. It is, I could not get on social media without seeing your book over and over and over again. It is that great. So for all of you guys out there, a little bit about Brit, and I know she can do her intro a lot better than I can, but born and raised in Southern California, graduate of Stanford and University of Michigan, a Hearst Wright Award winner, two times New York Times bestseller. And as I mentioned, she is on everyone's list, short list for awards. Y'all know. If you don't know her, look her up for sure. So thank you for having me and for joining our team here. And so I just want to dive right in. It's a really casual conversation, have a few questions, and we'll try to get through as many as we can before our time is up, because I have a lot of questions. I do. I really do. So for all you guys that do not know about her book, The Vanishing Half, I will give you a glimpse into what the story is about. I'm not going to give any spoilers because I don't want to mess it up for you. You need to read the book. Read the book, people. But it is about two African-American identical twins in southern Louisiana, small little town. At 16, they run away, and one decides to live a life as a white woman, and another lives a life as herself. So they have two very different stories as they're growing up, and then the next generation of their children, their stories are interwoven as well too. It is a beautiful story that has so many layers to it and touches so many different themes. I think I went through and I tried to count all the different themes that you hit. It's too many. It's too many. So the first question I definitely have for you is, your book starts in 1968. What's the significance of that year? Or was there a significance for you?
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for watching. And yeah, thanks for this question. I think there was a significance of that year to me. I think when I first started working on The Vanishing Half, I knew it was going to be set in the past at some point, and I kind of had it vaguely sort of mid-century, the 50s to 60s, as kind of my entry point into the book. But then when I thought about when to kind of enter the story, I kept thinking about the year 1968 for a lot of reasons. I think one is that it's just such a tumultuous year in American history. So you have the assassinations of Dr. King, of Bobby Kennedy. The Vietnam War was kind of ramping up. You had, the Democratic Convention and all the tumult there. So it was just really a tumultuous year. And I think a year in which sort of definitively kind of closed the door on the kind of early 60s idealism that people, had like the hope that there would be, some type of peaceful change. And that year was just like, no. So I think that it was, to me, a very just kind of interesting kind of breaking point, I think, in American history. And to imagine these characters who are experiencing their own kind of personal emergencies up against these kind of national emergencies that were happening, to me, that was kind of an interesting entry point to the story.
Mm-hmm. Now, are you a history buff, or was that year just one that, because of all those great things that were going on, or not so great things as well, that just kind of caught your eye and you thought, I'd stick with that era?
Yeah, I mean, I think I am generally interested in kind of maybe undersung moments in Black history. I
Um,
think particularly that era, I think often we talk about kind of the civil rights era and we focus a
mhm.
lot on people who were activists, and reasonably so. But, the vast majority of people were not activists. They were just kind of regular people, just kind of putting their heads down and going to work and trying to just get through. So I am really interested in those types of characters from Black history who were just kind of the ordinary people, not the people who we kind of rightfully celebrate as heroes, the people who were just kind of doing the everyday heroic thing of trying
Yeah.
to survive a really horrible situation.
Right, right. And I like that. I like how you said the unsung heroes, because the way that you write, all of your characters seem like someone I should know or someone I do know. They seem really, really familiar, in both of your works, actually. Is that do you pull from your family, from your friends, or from real life scenarios that you see?
Yeah, I think a bit. I definitely, my mom's family's from Louisiana and my dad's family's from Los Angeles. So the kind of geographies that the book encompasses, sort of
Yeah.
the kind of trajectory and migrations of my family in a way. So there's definitely that type of drawing on those types of ideas. I don't know that I write kind of. I just had a conversation earlier today with Jackie Woodson, and she said this thing that I really
Mm,
loved, which was that she was like, my work's not physically autobiographical, but emotionally it's autobiographical. And I really
mm,
love that idea. I think that that's entirely how I think of my work, which is it's not necessarily, ripped from my life or somebody who I know, but the emotions are definitely, my emotions or
yeah.
the relationships, all of those things.
Yeah, I definitely get it. Well,
Mhm.
that is so true. The way that you've kind of written your work, it's very easy to read. And if you're not a reader, or even if you are a reader, it reads very smooth, and quickly. I think I read your book in like 2 nights. And I'm
Okay.
usually not that quick of a reader, but I couldn't stop reading the story.
Mhm.
I kept going, one more chapter, one more chapter. Just kept on going. Well, I call this series the Breakthrough Series. And this year was kind of a breakthrough for Book Mecca, just kind of growing. And we're so happy that we're starting the year off with you coming on. But a part of that was I wanted to showcase authors that I feel like their work or themselves have kind of broken down barriers and walls, especially when it comes to the literary world. This is your second book, and both of them are on the New York Times best-selling author list, period. And I've read one article, and you were quoted saying, as a Black writer, you have to constantly justify why your work exists. So, what was the desire, or what was your push that kind of kept you going to break through a really tough industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of it, I just think about the writers that I grew up reading, I think about the people who modeled this for me and showed me that this was possible. When I was in college was kind of the moment that I started to kind of embrace the fact that I wanted to be a writer. I think I was, trying to like repress it for a very long time because I just didn't think I would be able to make a living doing it.
Mhm.
So I tried to kind of shoehorn myself into these other areas, and nothing was something that I really loved, like writing. And the time in which I was embracing that, I was, looking at. I went to Stanford, and Jesmyn Ward was a Stegner Fellow there at the time, and I
Right.
think that was around the time that she won the National Book Award the first time. So I remember that being a really huge moment for me as a young writer to see this young Black woman writer win this national award for writing Salvage the Bones, which is a book about, like we were talking about these undersung heroes, like a book about these ordinary, Southern working class Black people. And to see
Mhm.
that book receive the recognition it did, and also to just read the book and be amazed by her talent. I think that was a moment. And even further back when I was growing up, and I was growing up in the 90s, and I think of that as like such a heyday of Black writing.
It was
As
music
far
and
as
writing.
Yeah, I really, and I think I know it's something I talk about this with other Black people. I don't know that this is like a widely known thing, but
Like,
other Black people, yeah, like we know because I think about, obviously the Toni Morrisons and Alice Walkers. But I think about also, Terry McMillan, who was huge and
ooh,
is still a huge author.
yeah.
And to me, yeah, like to me showed that you can write about the ordinary, in her, works often these like middle class Black people and the sort of everyday dramas of their life.
Mhm.
And that not only can you write that, but also you can have people who are not Black be interested in those stories. Like she proved that that there was interest in kind of the ordinary lives of just everyday Black people. So I mean, I think about her, and I know Eric Jerome Dickey just passed, but that was a writer who I read a lot when I was too young to probably be reading him, but um,
Join the
so, but I think about all these writers, like that was so ordinary for me growing up at the time in which I did, just to see Black writers on bookshelves and at the library. So I think a lot of it, that's a long way of answering your question, which is to say, I think a lot of it was seeing these writers who I loved and who were just conversation pieces around, you knew people who were reading the books that you were reading and you were talking to them about these books, who were such a huge part of the culture and just a part of the conversation. Even if they weren't all like recognized by kind of wider American society, they were heroes to us. And I think that was such an important part of just my growing up as a person, but also as a young writer.
That is beautiful. You have such depth to your knowledge. Because how old are you?
I'm 30.
Exactly. I figured you were in the same age bracket. At 30, to have that background behind you, that is a testament to how you were raised and your upbringing,
Yeah.
for sure. Maybe a little Louisiana too. They tended to leave the books on the counter for you to read. Just happen to grab the book.
Yeah. Well, my oldest sister worked at the library. So she was kind of my like
Right.
book plug when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Because I could, I didn't have to go through my parents. Like I could go around my parents because my sister would like slide them to me. So that was, I think that was a lot of the way that I read a lot of the books that I read. And my parents also did not care what I read as long as I was reading, which I like am grateful for. I'm grateful that they just kind of trusted me to use my judgment, and we're just happy to see me with a book in my hands.
That's good. Do they like your work now?
I think they do. I hope they do. I don't like for them to read it as I'm working on it because that would make me way too self-conscious. So I usually will, once we have the like galley stage, that's when I will send them the
Mhm.
book because by then it's kind of done. So I think that I think they really did like The Vanishing Half. I think they like The Mothers too. So that's what they've told me. I hope they do.
Believe it, believe it. They probably did. I was here, looking through, as I mentioned earlier, you're on everybody's book club list and best list. Everybody's reading your book, but you have some big names reading your book. You have people like Oprah and Barack Obama reading your book. Do you ever just sit there and kind of imagine, like, I wonder what they thought about this part of the book?
I haven't, but I did have a moment yesterday. I was watching the inauguration and I saw, the Obamas arrive and there was like one kind of delayed moment of like, oh, it's very strange to think that, Barack Obama read this book. So it still feels very surreal. But that I think that was the most kind of surprising and definitely one of the coolest moments of publishing this book was being, that shout out from Barack Obama. It was
Yes.
very, very surreal.
Love that. Love that. And I will say, to me, reading and literature is like the great equalizer. You have everyone reading the same work. They
Mm-hmm.
may get different interpretations of it, but everyone's starting on page one, which
Yeah,
is,
that's
I
true.
think that's why I love reading. It just,
Mm-hmm.
everybody gets the same spot. Well,
Yes,
speaking of
definitely.
starting on page one and then going above and beyond, you were just tapped to have your book developed into a limited series by HBO. Yeah. Yeah. Everybody else during this pandemic was struggling. You were doing the most during 2020.
I know. It's very, I mean, I had one of my best friends who's just like, you're the only person who had a good year. And it feels like, awful to say that. It feels so gross. But, I felt so lucky that amid everything, while I was trapped in my apartment for months in New York, that my book was like having this big life, out without me, but was having this big life out in the world. So very surreal, but very exciting to see how the show turns out.
Do you have any picks of who you would want to play some of the characters?
I get asked that all the time, and honestly, I don't. I'm not even trying to be like coy about it. I just never thought about it as I was writing. I didn't envision actors, but I am really excited because I think it's going to be. I mean, it's a story to me. Really, this was a story about Black communities. Like, it's a story. It's not about Black versus white. I wasn't really interested in that. It's really a story about Black people and all of our diversity and all of our complexity. So the idea of there being, I hope that there are a lot of Black actors that are, want to be part of the project. And, and I'm just excited about the possibility of like, maybe we'll, discover somebody new. Maybe there'll be somebody who hasn't been, a big star and this could be like role. Like the idea of playing that role in somebody's career is really exciting too. So I'm just looking forward to it and seeing who comes on board.
Well, I am excited to see it. I just know that, how you watch those movies and you think, oh, it's not like the book, but it's still good. I really feel like they'll be able to take it and still make it just a really phenomenal show. So I am excited about that. I know all you guys follow her. I'll make sure you have her contact information. So when it comes out, y'all are right there watching it. Get HBO now. Get it now. So it's ready. And kind of speaking about some of the books in the background of it, there is a town, the fictional town of Mallard in your book, which I found so interesting. It's a town with, matter of fact, you explain. You probably do it better.
Sure. Well, yeah, it's a town of light-skinned Black people who kind of intermarry within their own community in hopes of that the community and their children, the future generations, will continue to get lighter and lighter. So it's weirdly, I've had it described as kind of both like a social, like a kind of eugenics project almost. I don't know a better way of putting it. It really is an attempt to kind of genetically engineer a lighter population.
Wow. Which I was sitting here, for all of you guys who don't know me in the book Mecca land, I'm from a little bitty town, almost like Mallard in East Texas, and small population. Was Mallard kind of fashioned after the town that your mother grew up in?
Not the town she grew up in, but a town that she heard about when she was a kid.
Okay.
So it wasn't, I mean, my mom has told me about, a lot of her experiences of growing up in Louisiana, and also just like her specific experiences around color. Because I consider my mother light skinned, but she was considered dark in her family. So like the way that she thinks about color is something that I've kind of observed and seen like throughout my life. That she had siblings who were lighter than her, and they had cousins, and the cousins would only want to play with the light-skinned sister and not her. Just all of these experiences around color that she kind of had. So a lot of it was in crafting the town, was thinking about that, and just what it means to see these kind of dynamics play out within Black communities. Like I said, it's not, to me, it was less interesting about what white people were doing at the time, and more interesting to look at what was happening within this specific Black community, and for the people who leave that community, people who return to it, and the people who were kind of inside the community as far as their skin is what we value, and the people who are outside of that, how they're treated.
Right. Wow. It always astounds me how in the Black community, there's so many different varieties and colors and backgrounds, but there's still always an issue. but that's not just in the Black community. It's in a lot of communities that have that different variation of skin tone. And for our viewers that don't know what this is colorism. Colorism is the prejudice or discrimination against individuals with different or darker skin tone than you, typically of the same ethnic or racial group. I liked how you didn't shy away from that at all. And you just kind of hit it head on, especially in when I was thinking of the characters in my head and everyone kind of imagines what they look like on their own. I'm going to show you what I thought she looked like.
Okay.
This is my grandmother. And I sat there and thought, like, I wonder what it would have been like to be my grandmother, looking almost, but not being.
Yes.
And how tough.
I think, someone told me a story about they had a grandmother, a relative who was that fair skinned and she got sick and had the option to, like, she could try to go to this white hospital to treat her, or she could go to this Black hospital. And knew that the white hospital would probably have better resources, would probably be better to treat her, but decided not to go to that white hospital and went to the Black hospital and ended up dying. And you think about, like, people who are making these choices, in the case of these twins, one who chooses to live as a white woman, one who chooses not to, and what the cost of those choices are, because the cost of them are different. Stella ends up gaining a lot of privilege and power and wealth, but I don't know that she gains happiness. And Desiree ends up going without, and that's part of what she experiences by returning to this small southern rural town. But at the same time, there's sort of the give and take to that. So yeah, I think it's been interesting to research the history of it and to think about the experiences of people who live between identities in that way, because I'm not someone who's ever passed for anything other than how I identified, like, in any way. So I've never had to consciously make a choice about how I want to be read or how I want to be perceived. So to me, people who have that ability to make that choice and what they choose is really interesting.
Well, it kind of makes me think back to I know this has nothing to do with this, but Rachel Dolezal and choosing what race she wanted to be. Not the same. I tell you that it's not the same.
Yes.
But it kind of made me think of it, having that freedom to say, I want to be this.
I think I agree. And I mean, I think that what the Rachel Dolezal of it all, it's actually been interesting because she has not come up a whole lot when I've been talking about this book, and I thought she would. I thought people would be bringing her up all the time. But what I think about that is Alison Hobbs, who wrote this book called A Chosen Exile, which is a history of racial passing. That was one of the books that I read in researching this book. She wrote, I think it was like an op-ed. It was around the time the Rachel Dolezal story happened, and she said something that I remembered, which was just, the idea that that Rachel Dolezal was telling a lie about what is already fiction. And the idea that, race and the idea that you can look at somebody and know exactly what they are, that's already a fiction. So that in and of itself is a fiction. And also additionally, Rachel Dolezal was lying about it. But, I thought that that sentence kind of very succinctly spoke to just the flimsiness of it all. And the idea that we live in a country and in a world that organizes us and that confers privileges or punishments based on these categories that are unclear and that are unstable, and they're not even necessarily knowable, So kind of duality, I found that such a fascinating way to think about her as a figure, and also to think about this book.
Yes, dropping gems. Today kind of felt like a little celebration after yesterday. I don't know about you readers out there and watchers. If you didn't get the recipe for the Vanish in Half cocktail, make sure to grab it. It will put you on your knees for sure. It definitely will. But it kind of made me think as well as I was making the cocktail and preparing for today, thinking through the characters and questions that she wanted to ask. One thing kind of really hit my mind. Jude's experience, one of the daughters, Desiree's daughter, her experience was a little different, and she didn't seem to get this positive reinforcement to kind of combat the negative and the colorism that was going on. If you were her mother, just put yourself in her, if you were her mother, what is something that you would want to tell her or to keep her from feeling so unlovable?
Yeah. I mean, I think that that is really hard. And that's also a thing that I struggled with in writing that relationship between Desiree and Jude. Because I knew that Desiree loves her daughter and wants to protect her from the harm that she experiences. But at the same time, she's brought her to this town and has decided to stay and raise her there in a place that she knows is going to be sort of violent to her. So she's already kind of put her in this unsafe space. And then in addition, I think about it from Jude's point of view. And I think about, it's sort of, it's like if you have like a really like beautiful friend who's like, you're pretty too. And you kind of think like, okay, there's that kind of that. Yeah, like, okay, there's kind of that feeling I think that Jude feels where her mother is telling her, oh, it's fine. Like, love yourself, all this. Yeah, like all of that I think feels very hollow to Jude because her mother will never, walk in her shoes. She'll never have to live in this town. And also she'll never have to be in the larger world, which is also colorist. It's not that once she leaves this specific town, she's suddenly going to be appreciated. She knows what is out there in the larger world. She sees these these ads for skin bleaching cream, and like I looked at so many of those when I was kind of writing that sequence. And it's depressing to see because they are so glamorous, and you're just like, how could this not appeal to somebody? These beautiful women and the handsome men, and there's always some kind of, obviously they're very targeted at women. They're very targeted at Black women in particular. So I don't know that I saw one that was aimed at a man to be like, lighten your skin. They were almost all telling, like when I was looking at them, they were almost all telling Black women, like, you will get this man if you have lighter skin. And 9 times out of 10, the man was darker. So it was always this very kind of gender-coded message that was aimed at Black women. And to see that, these were ads that were in, Black magazines and these things that you would be encountering. So, it's one thing like what Jude is directly experiencing in Mallard, but then, like I said, she's aware of this larger, apparatus that I opened this magazine and someone is telling me I should lighten my skin. So that's a long way of saying that, I think that that's tough because I wanted Desiree to try to care for Jude and try to protect her from this town. But I knew also that she could only do so much, sort of, she brought her to this place that was going to be unsafe because that was kind of the best that was like the only thing really she felt that she could do at the time. And she also can't protect her from the larger world, right. So I think a lot of Jude's story for me was about her trying to unlearn the toxic ideology that she has been taught. And I also wanted to show how hard that is, because I think it can be easy to say, love yourself. And that's for, that's for like anything. If that's, your weight or what your hair looks like or what type of body you have, it can be easy on the outside to say, well, you should just love yourself. There's nothing wrong with you. But if it doesn't feel that way to you, that doesn't really help. So I think a lot of the journey I thought about for Jude was how she can try to, once she's finally left this town and once she's gone out in the world to be an adult, how she can try to find a way to liberate herself from this really horrible ideology that even though she's left the town, that ideology does not quite leave her.
Yeah. I kept wanting to shake her mom, just like hold a hand and say something to her. Just let it just go on and just
Yeah.
made me so mad at some points in the story. But,
That's fair.
kind of thinking about her growing up and seeing things grow, and she kept looking for a way to leave. She kept waiting for the moment to leave. When is it going to change? When are things going to go back to where I'm comfortable? Did you ever have any of those experiences growing up? Because I read that you grew up in Oceanside, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you went to college somewhere different. So was it like a huge shock, or was there adjustments that you had to make?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've had a lot of those adjustments throughout my life. I grew up in Oceanside, which is North San Diego County, and it's a military town. It's sort of
Mm,
a I would consider it pretty middle class and pretty racially diverse because you have military families from lots of different races and from all over the country. Um, Excuse me. And then I went to Stanford, and it was, suddenly, these are all kids who went to boarding schools and private schools, and
different
even the
world.
black people I met. Yeah, I remember meeting black people who like knew the Obamas and just being like, "Oh, this is different. Like this is not what I grew
Oh,
up with." And then after that, I went to grad school in Michigan and Ann Arbor, which is 80% white. And
oh,
I'm suddenly in the Midwest and I'm freezing. So I've had a lot of those different experiences of kind of moving through and among worlds. But I liked the idea of exploring that for Jude as soon as I was like, okay, I've got to get her out of this town, because
yeah.
it was hard for me as a writer just to see her kind of beat up in this place for years.
Yeah. I
So I
kept
wanted to
seeing
hear
her
what happened.
guilt.
Yeah, like I wanted to see what happens when she leaves the town and is able to go out and see that the town she grew up with is not the world. And that's not
Mm,
to say that the rest of the world is some utopia, but it's just that what you grew up with and what you thought was normal is not normal to everybody. So I think once she's able to leave that place and sees a little bit more of the country and the world, then I was like, okay, maybe now she'll be able to finally be on a path towards liberating herself from this
yeah.
horrible place where she grew up.
Right. And for all of you readers out there, we're talking about The Vanishing Half, if you just joined us. And some of the main characters, you have Desiree, you have Stella, the two twin sisters, you have Kennedy, and you have Jude, which are the
Mhm,
daughters of the sisters.
mhm,
So those are the ones that kind of like stood out. But a lot of the other characters that are in the book have their own lives and they have
mhm,
layers to them. So when you
mhm,
read through, I'm not gonna give y'all all that stuff, but read through it, sure. But one of the characters, Stella, one of the identical sisters, the one
mhm,
who decided to be white,
mhm.
her ability to kind of act or adapt to the variety of ways of being white. She went from being a little country white to being
Mhm,
having money white, a little Southern
mhm.
California wealth.
Yes.
I think that came from her experience living as a black woman, having to adjust and to be kinder in certain situations than others, and in
Yeah.
stores. Sort of this code switching early on.
Yeah. That's actually a really good question. I don't know that I had thought about it like that, but I think you're totally right. That her experience is one of code switching. I think that one of the challenges for Stella is that she grows up in like a rural country town as a poor black girl, and she has experienced white people in that way.
Hmm.
And then she becomes white, still in the South, and then eventually has to be white in Southern California with some money. And those are all different experiences of whiteness, whether you
Yeah.
are experiencing it as a black person interacting or you are being that white person. So I kept thinking about that for her of, how would she, I think one of the things that I loved about writing Stella was the idea that she is always trying to perform whiteness, but she's always doing it a little bit wrong. She's
Yes.
always kind of a step or two behind. So she is trying to approximate what it means to be a white woman, a wealthy white woman. It's just like she's never really known a lot of rich white people, you know, even as a Black person, she didn't really know them. So she's got to like learn how to do that. So I had one friend who's one of my closest friends whose parents are from Kenya, and he really related to the book because he thought of it in a way as kind of an immigrant story. And there's a sense of that too. Stella is kind of, you know, she's kind of like an immigrant into the world of whiteness, and now she's trying to assimilate, and she doesn't, you know, she's trying to figure out how to do it, and she doesn't quite know how to do it. And no one teaches you. No one like takes your hand and shows you. Yeah, you just have to know. And if you don't do it right, there's punishments and penalties to that. So, you know, I think about her, you know, she, you know, marries a man with some money, and his experience of whiteness is obviously going to be very different than hers because he has only known kind of wealthy, sort of coastal whiteness. So her experience of like how white people have treated her, she's like, well, that's what I should do. That is what it means to be white, right? And for him, he's kind of horrified by that because that's not in his mind what whiteness is. So to me, that was what was kind of fun about writing Stella, was imagining her trying to do that code switching, but always doing it incorrectly because there's no one to teach you how to do it correctly.
Yes, you're white. Remember, you're supposed to know how to be white. So
exactly.
Expecting her to like get caught in some point in time, and I was thinking like somebody's gonna figure out she's gonna say something that's really off. One, I waited for it, but on the side you have Jude, and Jude has this notion of wanting to fit in to any world, really. The white world, be accepted, especially so much so because she is dark skinned. And it kind of made me think too of have you seen that the Beats by Dre commercial where they have all these Black people in different scenarios, some playing basketball, some playing music, all the sports and the music, and say baptizing the glitz, we're still all the same. It kind of made me think of Dude, thinking she had to be so phenomenal to be seen.
Yes.
Was that where you were going with that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely thought about that, you know, because, you know, the experience of Jude and her cousin, Kennedy, Stella's daughter, you know, they grow up under such different circumstances. You know, I've talked about Kennedy as sort of, you know, she's born on third base, like that's her life. Versus Jude, who's somebody who has to kind of claw her way up. You know, she has to fight for everything that she has. She has to be exceptional, as you said. She is an athlete, and she has to be great at that so that she can afford to go to college. You know, she has to, you know, compete. And then once she gets there, then she's got to compete against people who were born on third base and ended up where she is. And, you know, again, like I said, it was a thing that I thought about at Stanford because, you know, you had, I think particularly within the Black community, you had such a wide range between people who were on 100% financial aid and people who were friends with the Obamas and everything in between. You know, and I was somewhere in the middle there. But to see all of those experiences, and then to see, you know, when I'd be in classes with white kids, and then to see these white kids who went to private schools or boarding schools or had these really elite educations, and then just thinking to myself, like, you know, I went to public school, but we're both here in the same class. Like, here we are together. You know, but I think about that idea for Jude, you know, she's somebody who has to really fight for everything. She has to be exceptional. And what that requires of her, I wanted that work to be very visible. Like, I wanted that to be a thing that the reader couldn't really look away from, because I think that sometimes we do, particularly, I think often writers are weirdly, often when we're constructing stories, people kind of ignore the role of money, which is very strange to me because it's, you know, one of the, if not the most kind of determining factor about most of our lives.
Right.
But I wanted that role of money, or the absence of money, and the absence of privilege, all of that to be very visible as you see what Jude has to kind of fight and claw her way to versus what Kennedy has just been given as a birthright.
Absolutely. It's so true. It kind of has me thinking too of especially the timing of your book and all the things that have happened over the summer. Social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion has been such a hot topic that's been going on. And I've seen that has come up a lot when of diverse authors. I feel it's better to either read a variety of authors to get a different background and perspective, or a variety of stories or work from different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, I think both. I think for myself as a reader, I'm constantly wanting to. I'll say this. I think that the thing that I love the most about books and about reading and writing them is the idea of experiencing the life of a lives different than my own. The idea that you only, there's a character in The Vanishing Half who talks about, the fact that we only get to go through the world once and how tragic that is. But that's the thing that I love about reading, is that you get to have a glimpse into a life of someone who's different than you. So that's something that I've always loved. And I think also as a Black kid growing up, it was kind of always required of me. I always had to read about people who were different from me, because when I was in school, we were reading about white people. So to me, like that, yeah, the classics, right? So that's always been a normal thing for me. Of my parents were the ones who supplemented my, traditional education by, having me read, Toni Morrison and James Baldwin and Richard Wright and Zora Neale Hurston. That was because those are the books that my parents gave me. I wasn't reading them at school, but I always had to kind of go outside of that to find the books that spoke to me, I think. So I think for me, I'm always wanting to read about different places and different cultures and different backgrounds. That's something that I just enjoy as a reader. But I think for this summer has in part been very weird, because a lot of my experience of people coming to this book were a lot of very well-meaning white people who would tag me on Instagram and be like, "This is the first book by a Black person I've read." And I was just like, maybe keep that to yourself. Yeah, I just don't.
What do you say to that? Like,
yeah, I don't know what you say to it, because it's not flattering, and it's actually quite embarrassing, I think. Like I would be embarrassed to admit that, so it's something that, I think, and particularly, just specifically when it comes to Black writers, because there are lots of gaps I have in my reading. Like I'm not trying to sit on a high horse. I wish I read more books in translation. For example, I mostly read books set in America, and that's a really narrow percentage of the world. So there are lots of ways in which I want to expand and diversify my own reading. So I don't mean to be judgmental about it. But particularly right now, I don't understand how you can read contemporary American fiction without reading Black authors, because like I said, I mean, Jesmyn Ward, who just won the National Book Award twice, is one of the only writers. I think it's her and Faulkner who are like the only two people who have ever done this thing. Colson Whitehead, who won the Pulitzer. I think about people like Yaa Gyasi, Brian Washington, Brandon Taylor, Waitu Moore, Angela Flournoy. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Yeah.
I hope y'all taking notes.
Yes, I mean, I could go on about all of the Black writers right now who are just the exciting writers in this moment, and also winning awards, selling books. I mean, it's just it's like saying you listen to popular music but you don't listen to hip hop. It's just, it doesn't compute, because it's like, but that's what's on the radio. So I think that's what I find strange about it, is that I think it's such a exciting moment for Black writing. I think other than the 1990s, I don't know that there would be another time I would rather be just a Black person writing, because I think I'm the company that I'm in, And a lot of the writers that I rattled off are people who are just like friends of mine and people I know. So there are, a million more writers. Those were just the first people who came to mind. But it's so cool to know these writers and to get to talk to them, engage with their work, and read them. So I think that's the thing. I hope that, I know that I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but I just hope in general, people, I hope that we all continue to read outside of our worldview and outside of our frame of reference. I think that that's what's exciting about books. And whether that means, like I said, for me, wanting to read more books in translation, wanting to read more books that are not set in America, wanting to read books by writers from lots of different backgrounds other than my own. So I'm hoping that people who were awoken to that a little bit last year, I hope that they will continue to, keep that same energy and not try to treat Black writers like some type of passing fad, because we're not. We're here to stay, and we're doing some of the most exciting work right now.
That is so true. I say a big piece of what we try to do at Book Mecca is to encourage people to learn about the authors, because you'll pick up a book and you'll read the back or you'll look at the cover. Especially in the libraries, there's so many books, and you go in and you just find one that you want, or even the autobiographies, they may not be written by who you think they are written by. Take a little moment to figure out who are writing the stories, who's providing the narrative for it, and support diverse authors, support a variety of authors. I know here in the last 2 weeks, there's been quite a range of emotions going on, especially on social media, but one in particular stuck out to me, and I'm gonna shout her out because when I read it, I screenshotted it and I read it again. Her name is @Martina McGowan, so I'm gonna tag her later, but @Martina McGowan, and she said that today I cannot pretend I have never watched the light go out in someone's eyes when they discover that I am Black. When she said that, I thought of every experience when I put my full name on my resume, of every experience when I go into a presentation and my title is there, but my name is just Miss Scott. And then I walk in with the natural hair, and I always got wild earrings with the wild earrings. And it's like, oh, okay. Have you had some of those kind of uncomfortable, had to combat? You may not have. I think of all Black authors, together, like in Harlem, all drinking coffees and at the same area, but I know that doesn't happen. So have you had to kind of battle that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've been really fortunate because of the way that my books have been received, and the support that I have received from my publisher. But at the same time, I think one of the biggest moments where that experience that you're describing happened to me was when my first book was coming out, and I was going to do an interview somewhere in New York with my publicist, who's white. And we walked into the studio, and the producers immediately assumed that she was the author and I was like the assistant, or I was the publicist, or, and that was a moment that was, I think, so funny, bizarre, uncomfortable, awkward, all of those things of watching them realize that they had made that kind of knee-jerk assumption. So there are times like that, I think, I remember one of the first interviews I did for the Mothers was with this white journalist who was just baffled that the book was set in California and it had Black people in it, and was just like, but they don't live in the South. They don't live in Chicago. Like, why did you do that? And I just remember telling her, well, Black people live everywhere. Yeah. So, but I remember like receiving those types of questions. And, one of my friends, Angela Florida, I remember her telling me her first book came out maybe a year before mine. So she was she's I think always been like a little bit of a big sister to me. But I remember asking her, we were talking about these experiences, and she was just like, it's the Black tax. Like you pay it everywhere in every field and every career. It's just it's that thing that is exacted from Black writers. and Black people in any field, in any career. But I think that you see those moments when that pops up, and you see these interactions sometimes with readers, and you see these interactions with journalists. So for me, I feel many ways about it. I think one is that understanding that is such a universal Black experience, and that doesn't make it right, but also, who am I to think that I'll be exempt from it just because, my name's on a book? So I think that that's one of the ways I think about it. But then I think the other thing is that it does get to be exhausting because, in particular, like when I do events like this on Zoom with white interviewers or white readers are asking me questions directly, I'm just sitting on pins and needles the entire time because I have no idea what someone's going to ask me. There's that level of anxiety of, is this person going to say something offensive? Are they going to ask me something crazy? Or are they just going to sort of, are they just going to, sometimes I think a lot of white readers or white interviewers, they just want you to recite trauma. Like that is what they want from you, is to exact that from you. So I think, that it becomes frustrating and exhausting, but at the same time, I recognize that is what Black people are experiencing around the water cooler in their offices, and that is what my parents have experienced. And so I understand that there's a universality of it, which doesn't make it better, but it does, I think, I remind myself of that when I experience frustrating moments within publishing, because I'm working within an industry that's 90% white. And as are lots of Black people around the country working in similarly, white industries. So I try to remind myself of that to put it in perspective a little bit, but it doesn't make it any less frustrating.
It is a constant work. I think we're always going to have to battle and change the narrative. That is one of the beauties I have found during this pandemic, is it kind of levels everyone as well too, and it allows people who may not have had a space to create a space much like this. People are doing things that they didn't do before. They are having a voice. They are finding their voice. And one of the parts of kind of going through this pandemic, even though you wrote a book during the pandemic and launched all that, but some others may have experienced this loneliness, and loneliness is a big theme throughout your book as well too. There are a lot of characters that have moments of loneliness or years of loneliness, and you can see how it affects them. How has your time been during the pandemic outside of the book? But have you been stuck at home, or how has things been for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me it was really just the dramatic contrast between those experiences of my personal life being constricted within my apartment for months. We're coming up on a year of quarantine, which I can hardly believe, but being stuck inside and feeling completely for most of spring and summer I was just by myself. So being quarantining alone, and that experience of extreme isolation. And then at the same time promoting this book, which has meant, more people have seen like the inside of my apartment than before when I had friends who came over. So that experience of talking to people a lot on Zoom, or just that kind of experience of, and then seeing the book go out in the world and seeing people tag me in Australia and Germany and Poland and France, and to see that experience while my life was conducted within my apartment by myself. I think that's been such a strange thing. And I think for me, what I was so grateful for was, of course, friends and family and people making time to do Zoom happy hours and to FaceTime and whatever. I was so grateful for that. And I think also being able to finally read, because when the pandemic first started, I just could not focus on anything. So once I finally refound my attention span and I began to read again, listening to audiobooks, listening to podcasts, which have kept me great company of just these voices that you hear every week. These people you don't know, but there's something comforting about, hear my show, has a new episode and they're going to be talking about, whatever. So all of those things I think have been really important in helping me feel less lonely and feel more connected to not only my family and friends, but also everyone else, kind of where we all are in the country and in the world.
That's beautiful, beautiful. I know everyone has found ways to deal with a very abnormal time. I don't think anyone, no, well, I know no one has experienced anything like this. And it has changed the way that we're looking at the way that we operate, the way that we live our lives and choices that we've made. And kind of speaking along those lines, in your book, you go through a lot of different time periods. You go through different time periods as well as different locations and generations, all in one book. This is a lot going on in one book. I don't even know how you did that, but you did it seamlessly. But thinking about the trauma and the tumultuous events that the characters had, and it didn't end with just that generation. It moved on to affect the next generation. So we're always trying to leave the next one better than we were. What would you like your legacy to be?
Ooh, that's a really big question. I think about, like I said, I think about the writers that I grew up reading and how much they modeled for me what was possible, and also how much they modeled for me that we don't have to write to an imagined white reader. We can tell stories within our community about our communities. There's so much diversity within Blackness. There's so much complexity within that. So I don't have to write for an imagined white reader. I don't have to explain. I don't have to translate. I don't have to do that work that Black writers in earlier times have felt sort of compelled to do in order to survive. So I want to further that. I would love to continue to model, that is possible, that we can tell stories within our community and stories that are complex and stories that are not intended to make ourselves seem palatable to white people, and that we can still make it. So I hope to be just part of that legacy that I looked up to and continue to look up to as a young writer.
Well, you are definitely already there. Your books will not be ignored. They will not be books that is left on the shelf and no one reads. I can guarantee that. And I'm not anybody, but you can guarantee that from me. So before we go, I definitely want to pub your book again. I want you guys to get this book, The Vanishing Half. Go to your library. If you don't have the money to buy it, go buy it at your support independent local bookstores, your Black bookstores. You can even go to bookmecca.org and get the book. Get started on it. You got plenty of time to read. You're not leaving the house. So go ahead and get the book right now. And before we close, I always like to close with a quote. And I found one that I thought was pretty fitting. And it's from Michelle Obama. And she says, "Do not ever let anyone make you feel like you don't matter or like you don't have a place in our American story, because you do. And you have a right to be exactly who you are." And I thought that was so fitting for the work that you have, the work that you will continue to do. I know a question that came in, what's your next book? I always ask and early. Y'all keep asking. Do you have one?
I'm working on it. It's a book about music. So that's all I can say right now. It's still very early, but I'm excited to have a new project to work on while, as you said, I'm not going anywhere. So I'm excited to use this time while I'm inside.
Well, that is wonderful. We are excited. We cannot wait to read your next book. Go back and read the books that she's already written so you'll be caught up. You know what's going on. And hopefully we can have you back again. Thank you so much. Any last words you want to leave for our viewers?
No, just thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks everyone who's read The Vanishing Half and who's tagged me and shouted me out and just embraced me. It's been such a exciting thing and what has been a really dismal time for everybody. So thank you for all the love and support.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, all right, you guys. I told you you'd have enough time to go watch Versus. So now you can go watch it.
Go watch it too.
So go ahead, get your drinks, make your Vanishing Half cocktail. I'll see y'all at the Versus. All right, have a good night. Thank you.
Bye.